All right, eighth grade, um, Freak the Mighty. So Rodman, Philbrick, Freak the Mighty. Thank you, Scholastic, for letting us do read alouds during our remote learning. But we are going to pick up on chapter 13. So you read 9 through 12 last week, which finished up the summer for these guys, for Kevin and Max, or Freak and Max. And they had that adventure at the tenements where they met Loretta Lee and Iggy. That didn't go so well. But we also have their first first days at school that fall where they have classes together. And it didn't look like it was going to go well, right? The kids were teasing them. Lots of just cruel, right? Just some mean stuff that kids are saying. But in the end, they get persuaded to think that the Max Kevin combo is pretty awesome. And they disrupt the entire class of Mrs. Donnelly. And so they end up at the principal's office, but it seems to go well. So they're okay. So they get off the hook. So chapter 13 starts us, and we move along pretty quickly for these chapters. So 13 through 16, 13, 14, 15, 16. Yeah, 13 through 16 today. And the plot picks up. There's some action that picks up. So we start them in the school year. We got to get to see their routine and different things they do in their classes, but it gets us all the way about to Christmas time. So it moves pretty quickly. So we'll try to keep going. So if you want to follow along with me, I'm on page 80 if you're reading in your copy at home. Otherwise, you are welcome to just listen and follow along. So this one's called American Chop Suey. So if you don't know what that is, it's like a casserole, goulash type food, if you have that kind of thing where it's noodles and meat and vegetables all kind of mixed together, like a casserole. So I used to think all that spooky stuff about Friday the 13th was just a pile of baloney. But now I'm getting my own personal introduction to what can happen. It's October, and so far things have been going pretty good, better than I ever expected. Me and Freak are like this unit. And even Mrs. Donnelly says she's starting to get used to us, which is her way of admitting that Freak is about twice as smart as she is, and for sure he's read more books. She keeps saying stuff like, Kevin, we know you know the answer because you always know the answer, so wouldn't it be nice if someone else got a chance? For instance, your friend Maxwell? And Freak goes, he knows the answer, Mrs. Donnelly. Yes, Kevin, I'm sure you're correct because you're always correct, but for a change, I really like to hear Maxwell speak for himself. Maxwell? Maxwell Kane? This is dumb, because what does it matter if I know the answer? And if I don't know, then Freak will tell me, and he'll say it in a way I can understand, which is a lot better than Mrs. Donnelly can do. So what I do? I just shrug and smile and wait, because I know she'll get tired of asking me and move on to the next. As a matter of fact, I do know the answer. The reason Johnny Tremaine got mad and hateful is because he burned his hand in a stupid accident. And I know about that because Freak's been showing me how to read a whole book. And for some reason, it all makes sense, where before it was just a bunch of words I didn't care about. My reading skills tutor, Mr. Meehan, says stuff like, Max, the tests have always shown you're not dyslexic or disabled, and this proves it. And you know, my personal opinion has always been you're lazy and stubborn and you didn't want to learn. So if hanging out with Kevin somehow improves your attitude and your skills, that's great. Keep up the good work. Not very nice. It was Mr. Meehan who had a word with Mrs. Donnelly, and that's why she finally gave up on trying to make me talk in class. And instead, she waits until study hall, where she asks me the same questions alone, and I tell her the answers. She still doesn't get it, though, because she always goes, but Maxwell, if you can speak to me, then you can speak to your classmates, right? Wrong. Big difference. I can't explain what it is, except my mouth shuts up when there's more than one or two people, and a whole classroom full? Forget it. Okay, you're shy about public speaking, but how does that apply to writing down the answers? And if you can read, then you can write, right? Wrong again. The reading stuff, Freak helped me figure out by showing how words are just voices on paper. Writing down the words is a whole different story. No matter what Freak says, writing down the stuff is not like talking, and my hands feel huge and clumsy. It's like the pencil is a piece of spaghetti or something, and it keeps slipping away. Mrs. Donnelly says, okay, for now. She's satisfied I can read, but we'll really have to work on this writing thing, won't we, Maxwell? And when she says that, I just nod and look away, because inside I'm thinking, forget it. No way. Like Freak says, reading is just a way of listening, and I could always listen. But writing is like talking. And that's a whole other ballgame. Anyhow, what happens first on Friday the 13th, we're in homeroom when this note comes from the principal's office. Maxwell Kane, your presence is requested. Gulp. So Freak and I get up and go to the teacher. And the teacher says, no, Kevin, you stay here. Mrs. Addison was very specific. Maxwell is to go alone. Freak starts to smart mouth her, and then he changes his mind and he nudges me and he whispers, just give him name, rank, and serial number. Deny everything. You aren't back by 1000 hours. We organize a search and rescue mission. He offers to lend me his dictionary in case I want to try out any big words on Mrs. Addison. But I'm already so worried about being called in alone. All I can think is they're going to put me back in the learning disabled class. I've already decided I'll run away if they do that. I'll go live in the woods somewhere and jump out and scare people. Anyhow, I don't take Freak's dictionary along because my hands are trembling and I might drop it. Or Mrs. Addison might ask me a word and I'll forget how to look it up and prove I'm a butthead goon. Mrs. Addison is waiting outside her office, like she does. And she's trying to smile, but she's not really a smiling kind of person. And I can tell this is serious, whatever it is. Like, maybe somebody died. And I go, Graham? Is Graham okay? Yes, everybody's fine. Come in and sit down, Maxwell, and please, try to relax. Yeah, right. Mrs. Addison is sitting there in her big chair, and she's looking up at the ceiling, and she's looking at the floor, and at her hands, and finally she gets around to looking at me. This is rather difficult, Maxwell. I don't know where to begin. First, let me say we're all very pleased with your progress. It's nothing short of miraculous. It almost convinces me you knew how to read at your level all along and were for some reason keeping it a secret. I'm not really hearing what she's saying because there's like this little bird fluttering inside my chest and it makes me blurt out, you're putting me back in LD, right? Mrs. Addison comes over and pats me on the shoulder and I can tell it makes her nervous touching me, but she does it anyway and she goes, no, nothing like that. This has nothing to do with school, Maxwell. This is a personal situation. Because if I have to go back in LD class, I won't. I just won't. I'll run away. I will. Maxwell, this is not about your classwork or even about school. This is about your, father. My, father. Which makes me wish all of a sudden I'd done something wrong and Mrs. Addison was just giving me detention. She takes a deep breath and folds her hands together like she's praying and she says, a request has been forwarded to me from the parole board. A request from your father. Maxwell, your father wants to know if... I don't want to hear it. I jump up and cover my ears, holding my hands real tight. Don't want to hear it. Don't want to hear it. Don't. What happens when you go nuts in the principal's office? She calls in the school nurse. And the two of them are trying to hug me and calm me down. And it's like I'm back in daycare or something. Maxwell, Mrs. Addison is saying, and she's trying to pry my hands away from my ears. Maxwell, please forget about it, okay? Forget I said it. You don't have to do anything you don't want to do, okay? I will make sure of that, I promise. I swear on my honor, he can't make you do anything you don't want to do. I'm going to make that very clear to the parole board and his lawyer, very clear indeed. I finally take my hands off my ears, which wasn't really working because I could still hear everything they said, and big surprise, I'm sitting in the corner of the room, down on the floor with my knees all hunched up. I don't even remember how I got there. It's like I blanked out or something, and the nurse is giving me this cup of water, and the weird thing is, she's crying. I'm sorry, I say, I didn't mean to hurt you. You didn't, she said. I cry easily. Don't you worry about it. I do worry about it, though, because if she's crying, I must have hit her, and I don't remember it, which, if you really think about it, is really scary. Who knows what I might do and not remember it? The worst thing happens later. In the cafeteria, Freak has this thing about American chop suey. He loves the stuff. The gooier, the better. You'd never believe a person so small could eat so much. And when he holds up his plate, he always says, please, sir, more gruel. And I always say, it's American chop suey, not gruel. I looked up gruel, remember? And he always goes, I beg of you, sir, more gruel. So finally, I get up to get him another helping. When I come back, something's wrong. Freak's face is all red and swollen up, and he's making this huck noise. He can't talk, and all he can do is look at me and try to say something with his eyes, and I'm running to get the nurse. Quick! He can't breathe! He can't breathe! And then she's running as fast as me, and she's yelling for someone to call an ambulance. Back in the cafeteria, Freak is turning purple. The nurse grabs him, and she's got this plastic thing she shoves into his mouth. His eyes are closed up tight, and one of his legs is kicking. I don't know what to do, so I start hopping up and down in one place, and when kids keep crowding around, I push them back. Next thing, Freak's face is starting to look pink instead of purple. He's breathing okay. Right about then, the ambulance comes. I never even heard the siren. And Freak is trying to talk in this croaky voice, and they put him on the stretcher. I'm okay, he keeps saying. Really, I'm okay. I just want to go home. The deal is, once they call the ambulance, you have to go to the hospital to get checked out. That's a rule. I keep trying to get into the back of the ambulance with him, but they won't let me. And finally, Mrs. Addison has to come out and pull me away until the ambulance leaves with just the light going and not the siren. You've had quite a day, haven't you? She says, walking me back to the school. It's not me who had quite a day. I said, Kevin is the one. All he did was try to eat his lunch. Mrs. Addison gives me this look, and then she goes, You're going to be okay, Maxwell Kane. I'm sure of it now. She's okay for a principal, but for some reason, I still can't make her understand that it's not me who had a really bad Friday the 13th. And I swear on the dictionary, if Freak ever tries to eat American chop suey again, I'll dump it on his head or something. Chapter 14. Cross my heart and hope to die. Graham lets me stay home the next day because Freak is getting out of the hospital, and I'm right on the front step when the fair Gwen pulls up in her car and Freak is riding in the back. You can barely see him in the window. He's got this big grin that makes me feel like everything's going to be okay, the way everybody keeps saying. And I go, Is it okay if I carry him inside? And the fair Gwen says, Of course. He has to rest. She says he stays in the house until I say different. Is that understood? In his room, Freak is right away ordering me around. Bring me this and go do that. And you'd never guess he'd been sick. A minor incident, he said, easily corrected by biogenic intervention. You mean that robot stuff? And Freak goes, Shh. The fair Gwen must not know of the plan. The very idea strikes fear into her heart. Well, it is pretty scary, I say, getting an operation to give you a whole new body. I'm not scared, Freak says. I'm looking forward to it. So when does it happen? Freak gets this faraway look and he says, I'm not sure. Dr. Spivak, she's my doctor. She says maybe a year or two. Well, how come you need a new body? I ask. How come you can't just stay like you are? Freak shakes his head like he knows I'm not smart enough to understand. No one stays like they are, he said. Everybody is always changing. My problem is I'm growing on the inside, but not the outside. He doesn't want to talk about it anymore, which is fine with me. In another couple of days, everything's back to normal. We're going to school like always, and everything's going real good until Christmas vacation when, if you'll excuse the expression, all heck breaks loose. So there, just briefly, that's where Kevin, for the first time, talks about his disability a little bit. He talks about his internal organs and things like that are growing, but his bones, his body is not. So you can imagine the complications that will have for him, right? If all of his lungs, his heart, his stomach, his liver, if all these things are growing to adult size in a kindergartner's body, right? You can imagine that that's not something you can do forever, right? So Christmas vacation, there's our foreshadow. I'm in the down under, trying to get the stupid wrapping paper to cover the stupid presents I got for Graham and Grim when the shouting starts upstairs. Now understand, Grim never yells at Graham. Not that I can ever remember. And Graham, well, the worst thing she ever does is cry when she's mad, but somebody sure is yelling up there. So I sneak up the stairs, and I don't even have to put my ear to the door. That's how loud it is. Over my dead body, you will. That's Graham yelling. And her voice is big and full of tears, and Grim's voice isn't nearly as loud. And I open the door a crack and hear whatever it is that made Graham so mad at him. I have an obligation, he's saying. A man has to protect his family. Not with a gun, Graham yells. Not in this house. I won't have it. I can't stand it. How could they do this to us? How could they? He fooled them, Grim is saying. Just like he fooled Annie, just like he fooled us once upon a time, but never again, though. That man tries to set foot in this house. I aim to shoot him. No guns, Graham says. You don't know about guns. Of course I do. I was in the army, wasn't I? That was 30 years ago. I know what will happen. Don't you think I've dreamt about it the last 8 years? He'll come in here. He'll take that gun away from you, and then he'll do the shooting. By now I figured out who they're talking about. I mean, I guess you have too. None other than him. Killer Kane. My father. Maybe they won't let him out, Graham is saying. If they do, they'll give us protection. Sure they will, Grim says. Just like they protected our Annie. Next thing, Graham is crying, and you can tell Grim is trying to make her feel better, going, There, my dear. I know. There. A while later, I hear the cellar stairs creaking. It's Grim, and he knocks on my door. Come on in. Grim comes inside, and for once he doesn't tell me what a rat hole I'm living in or what smells like a locker room because I forgot to put my socks in the hamper. He sits on the edge of my bed and folds his hands together. I never think about how old he is because he never acts old, but tonight he's all white and bent and his skin is saggy. He's about 1,000 years old. And he says, I guess you heard the ruckus. Your grandma gets so upset, bless her heart. Can't abide the idea of violence. Can't say I blame her. Did he escape? I ask. Is that what happened? Grim shakes his head. He's up for parole. That's dumb. That's so dumb. And Grim goes, you hit the nail on the head, son. What I did do, just so you know, I went to the court and made it so he won't be allowed within a mile of this house. And if he does try to come here, they'll send him back to prison. The judge promised me that much. And I say, maybe you should get a gun. Grim doesn't say anything for quite a while, and then he goes, maybe I will. Maybe I won't. Can't tell your grandma about it, though. And it breaks my heart to lie to her. That's one thing we've never done. I won't tell. Grim is quiet again. Then he stands up from my bed, and in this real old, tired voice, he says, everything's going to be okay, Max. I'll make sure of it, but for the next few days, I want you to stay in the house. Promise me you'll do that? Cross my heart, I say. Cross my heart and hope to die. Chapter 15. What came down the chimney? I'll probably do some predicting here. Christmas Eve is real quiet. Like Freak says, you could hear a mouse fart, which, even if it is a stupid joke, makes Grim smile and shake his head. Freak and the Fair Gwen have supper with us, and we're all trying to pretend like everything is normal, and nobody says a word about Killer Kane getting out of prison. The Fair Gwen is wearing this dark red silky blouse and a long black skirt that almost touches the floor, and her waist is so small, she looks like one of those Christmas ornaments, the kind that make the tinkle bell sound when the branches move. Freak's all dressed up too. He's wearing this tweedy new suit jacket that has patches on the elbows, and Grim says all he needs is a pipe and he'll look quite the professor. No tobacco, Freak says. Nicotine is a toxic waste of time. Just the pipe, Grim insists. You don't have to smoke it. Don't get him started on bad habits, Graham says. Maxwell, pass the mint sauce. Mint sauce is one of Graham's specialties, and you'd be amazed how it improves everything, which is why I've been keeping it close by. Anyhow, the food is the best. You can't beat Graham for Christmas or Thanksgiving or birthdays, and we all eat until we're fit to bust, except the Fair Gwen makes sure Freak doesn't eat too fast. You'd think I was starving him, the Fair Gwen said. Please, sir, more gruel, he says, holding up his plate and making a funny face where his tongue sticks out sideways. And Graham laughs so hard she has a coughing fit, which makes us all shut up. After supper, we sit around like you do, admiring the tree and talking about how lucky we are not to be homeless. And Grim starts telling these old stories about when he was a kid and they got lumps of coal in their stockings. If we were lucky, we got an apple core, he says, or a few orange rinds. Now, Arthur, Graham says, you never got a lump of coal in your life. You're right. We never even got a lump of coal. Can you imagine? My father couldn't afford coal, so he wrote the word coal on a piece of paper and put it in our stockings, and we'd pretend it was a lump of coal. That's how poor we were. The Fair Gwen is laughing to herself and shaking her head, and Graham says, how can you tell such lies on Christmas Eve? I'm telling tales, my dear, not lies. Lies are mean things, and tales are meant to entertain. And so we all sit there acting polite and listening to Grim make up stuff no one would ever in a million years believe. And all of us have a cup of chocolate and a piece of Russell Stover candy right out of the box. Then it's time to pass around a few of the presents. Grim has this rule that you can open one on Christmas Eve and you save the rest for morning, which can be tough deciding which one to open first. Grim always starts it off because, like he says, he's really a kid at heart and can't stand to wait. From Graham, he gets this woolly sweater that buttons up the front, and he acts surprised, even though he's got about 100 just like it already. Then Graham opens her present for me, which is a bracelet made of shells from beaches around the world, and she right away puts it on and says it's just what she wanted, which is so like Graham. You'd give her an old beer can and she'd act pleased and say it was just what she wanted. Then Freak opens his present for me. And even before he gets the paper all the way off, he gives me this thumbs up and says, cool! It's a gizmo that looks like a jackknife, but really it's a whole bunch of little screwdrivers and wrenches and a little magnifying glass. Pretty sure Freak can invent stuff with it if he feels like. Graham gives Fair Gwen this scarf that just happens to match her blouse, and everybody goes ooh and aha. Then I finally decide what present to open. Right away, you'd know it was something Freak did because the box isn't square. It's pointed at the top like a pyramid, And instead of regular wrapping paper, he's got Sunday comics taped all over it. And it's driving me nuts trying to figure out what would fit inside a pyramid-shaped box. Freak seems like he's just as excited as me. Even though he already knows what he put inside, take off all the paper first, he says. There's a special way to open it. Real careful, I peel off all the paper. And the thing is, it's not a pyramid-shaped box, I thought. That he bought somewhere. He made it. You can see where he cut out pieces of cardboard and taped them all together, and written on the sides of the pyramid are these little signs and arrows. Follow the arrows, he says. The arrows point all over the place, and I have to keep turning the pyramid around until finally I get to a sign that says, press here and be amazed. Go on, Freak says. It's not an explosive device, silly. It won't blow up in your face. I press on the spot on the pyramid, and all of a sudden, all four sides fold down at the same time. And I'm looking inside the pyramid, and just like Freak promised, I'm amazed. The young man is a genius, Grim is saying, and I don't use that word lightly. Grim is right about that, because Freak has the whole thing rigged with these elastic bands and paper clips, which is what made the sides unfold all at the same time. Inside this little platform, and on the platform is a book. Not a normal book like you buy in the store, but a book he made himself. You can tell that right away. It looks so special. I'm afraid to pick it up or I might ruin it. What I did was take all my favorite words, Freak says, and put them in alphabetical order. Like a dictionary? Exactly, Freak says, but different, because this is my dictionary. Go on, look inside. I open up the book the way he asks, and the pages smell like a ballpoint pen. It starts with A, just like a regular dictionary, but as Freak said, it's different. A, aardvark, a silly-looking creature that eats ants. Arg, what the aardvark says when it eats ants. Abacus, if you've seen those, it's the wires with the beads on them. You move back and forth for adding. A finger-powered computer. Abscissa, the horizontal truth. Here's a little tip. If you look up the actual words, some of these are really funny definitions. You don't have to read them all tonight, Freak says. Save some for tomorrow. I gotta tell you, though, you're gonna flip when you get to see what I did with the disease. This is the best. Getting Freak's dictionary. Everything else is extra. I figure it'll take forever to fall asleep because my head is full of stuff. Grim and his written down lump of coal. A pyramid with a special book inside. How fat, wet flakes of snow are falling when the fair Gwen towed Freak home in his American Flyer wagon, and the way he was pretending to boss her by saying, on Donner, on Dasher, on Guinevere, and she's telling him to shut up or she'll leave him outside until he turns into a snowman. Which must be why I'm dreaming about a little snowman who looks like Freak. The snowman keeps saying, cool, cool. And when I wake up, I can feel the cold coming into my bedroom, which is weird. Because it's always warm in the down under with the furnace right next door. I think I hear the wind right there in the room, except it's not the wind. Someone breathing. Someone who rises up darker than night, as big as the room, and puts a giant hand on my face and presses down. Don't say a word, boy, he whispers. Not a sound. I try to move. I try to shrink myself back into the bed, but the hand follows me down. The hand is so hard and strong, I can't move, and it feels like my heart has stopped beating. It's waiting to see what will happen next. I came back, he says, like I promised. Last chapter, 16. A chip off the old block. Once on the TV, this dude hypnotized a lobster. Maybe you saw it. He touches the lobster and it freezes. It can't move. That's sort of what happens to me when his hand clamps over my mouth. Like I'm paralyzed and my head is empty and all there is in the world is that big hand and this cool breath like the wind. So this is where the geezer stuck you, huh? He whispers, down in the basement, out of sight, out of mind. I still can't see his face. He's this huge shape in the room. Everything changes now, he says. It's time I got to know my own son, who had his mind poisoned against me. He makes me sit up and shushes me to make sure I won't make any noise. Making noise is the last thing I want to do because I don't know whether or not Grim ever bought that gun he mentioned or what might happen to him if he tries to use it. Graham's bad dream about Grim getting shot with his own gun seems pretty real right now, and I don't want to be the one to make it come true. I know what they told you, he says. It's all a big lie, you understand? I never killed anybody, and that's the truth. So help me God. By now I'm sitting up on the bed, and he's making me put on my clothes, and the weird thing is, none of this is a surprise. Somehow I always knew this would happen, that he would come for me in the night, that I would wake up and find him here, filling the room, and that I'd feel empty. I'm so weak. I can hardly put my shoes on, like when you wake up and your arm's still asleep and you can hardly make it move. That's what I feel like all over, numb and prickly and as light as a balloon, like my hands might float up in the air if I let them. This'll be an adventure, he says. You're going to have the time of your life, boy. Okay, we're leaving and not a peep out of you. The bulkhead door is open and you can see the stars. Some people think the stars look close enough to touch, but Freak says the sky is like a photograph from a billion years ago. It's just some old movie they're showing up there. And lots of those stars have already switched off by now. They're already dead, and what we're seeing is the rerun, which makes sense if you think about it. Someday the rerun will come to an end, and you'll all see the stars start to flick off, like a billion little flames blown out by the wind. This way, he says, quiet as a mouse. There's snow on the ground, not a lot, enough to cover the ground, and I can tell how cold the air is, but I can't feel it. Even without a jacket, which I didn't have time to put on, the cold doesn't matter. Nothing does, really. Not Grim and Graham, or the old stars in the sky, or Freak and the fair Gwen. They're all just make-believe. This dream I was having for a long time. And now I'm awake again, and he's still filling the room somehow, even though we're outside. The lights are out at Freak's house, and I'm thinking, the stars clicked off. And I don't even know why I'm thinking that. It's like a dead voice in my head or something. We're under a streetlight when he says, let me look at you. He's got these big eyebrows that make it hard to see his eyes, and that's fine. I don't want to see them. Looking at those eyes is asking to have a bad dream. My, he says, checking me out. Will you look at this? It's like I'm looking at an old picture of myself. You really are a chip off the old block. You know that. I don't say anything, and he reaches out and touches my face real gentle, as if he'd never hurt a fly. I say, boy, do you know that? Answer me now. Yes, sir, I say. Everybody says so. Christmas Eve, he says. You know how many Christmas Eves I've been deprived of my own blood kin? Now, is that fair? To do that to a man, lock him up for a crime he never did? He's waiting for me to answer, and I say, no, sir, not fair. That's over and done now, he says. We're starting fresh. Just you and me, boy. That's how it was meant to be. I'm standing there under the streetlight, and it's amazing how quiet it is. Like everybody went away or died. The quiet is almost as big as he is. He's as tall as me, only wider everywhere. And for some reason, maybe because we're not far from Freak's house, I'm thinking this weird thought. He doesn't need a suit of armor. No, he doesn't need a horse or a lance or a pledge to the king or the love of a fair lady. He doesn't need anything except what he is. He's everything, all rolled into one. And no one can ever beat him, not even the brave Lancelot. And he's squinting around, and his eyebrows are furrowed shadows, and he says, you know what I think of when I see a neighborhood like this? Hamsters is what I think. That's how these people live, like hamsters in cages. They have their little wheels to run on, and that's what they do for their whole lives. They run and get nowhere. They just spin. I stand there. They poisoned you against me. I know that, he says. Give it time. You'll see the truth. He starts walking fast, and I walk with him like my feet already know where to go. We're cutting through the side streets and heading down to the pond, all cold and white and frozen. Tomorrow morning, a bunch of kids will take their new sleds and skates out there and probably lose their new mittens and scarves and get yelled at by their moms and dads. But tonight, the pond is as empty as the moon, as empty as my head. Once, a car goes by real slow around the pond, and I've got this strange feeling that there's no one at the wheel. He hooks his finger in my shirt collar and makes me duck down until the car goes by. The car passes. Until the car passes. You can't see through the dark windows, and you can hear the snow crunching under the tires, squeaky and frozen. We're invisible, he says, making me stand up. Now, isn't that a kick in the pants? My feet already know where we're going. The New Testaments. There are a few lights on in the old buildings, and you can see some of the windows are cracked. Looks like a knife cut against the light, and he's saying, you know about Mary and Joseph? How they sought shelter in Bethlehem? How baby Jesus was born in a manger? I try to nod, and the funny thing is, even though I'm not cold, my teeth are chattering. It's like the rest of me is freezing, but my head hasn't noticed. That's what we're doing. Seeking shelter, he says. Except this isn't exactly a manger we're going to. No, sir, I say. It sure isn't. And he touches me real soft on the back of the neck and says, I didn't ask you a question, boy. Rule number 1, don't sass your old man. I make sure my mouth stays shut. We're coming up on the Testaments, and they look almost pretty, with the new snow coating the roofs and making the yards look clean and white and soft. You can see where an old bike handlebars coming up through the snow and shapes of other things left out, or even the old car up on blocks looks new, like it might take off in the air without any wheels. I know where we're going, even though he doesn't tell me. The door opens before we get there, and Loretta Lee is standing in the light, and she's saying, Iggy, come look what the cat dragged in. And he says, say hello to my boy, Loretta. Ain't he a chip off the old block? Then we're inside, and Iggy is there bolting the door behind us and closing the shades, and Loretta, she's wearing this real slinky red dress that looks like it might fall off if she sneezed, and she's saying, mission accomplished, hey, Kenny? I knew you could do it if anybody could. And Iggy says, watch your mouth, Loretta. I do believe you've been drinking, my father says. Has she been drinking, Iggy? I thought I made myself clear. Hey, it's Christmas Eve, Iggy says. He sounds real nervous. A little punch. What can hurt? A little punch, Loretta says. Her voice is slurpy. That's all. She's wearing these fake eyelashes, and they're coming loose, so her eyes look almost as blurry as her red mouth. And I know because she keeps flapping her eyes at me and smiling so I can see where lipstick got on her teeth. And Iggy says, she's okay, Kenny. You got my word. Oh, right, Loretta says, turned over a new leaf. Preacher Kane turned over a new leaf, so there's no booze for anybody on Christmas Eve, even in our own house where a man is his castle. Oh, shut it, Iggy says, and he makes Loretta sit down on the busted couch, where she kind of leans over and waves at me, wink, wink. Bring me and my boy some food, my father says. We've been out in the cold for 8 long years, and we're hungry. Aren't we, son? Yes, sir, I say. Iggy goes into the kitchen to fry up some hamburgers, and we sit there waiting, not saying anything. Loretta's snuggled up on the couch, passed out, with this dreamy look on her face. I eat the greasy burger, even though I can hardly stand to swallow, and Iggy's fussing around like it's such a big deal having Kenny Kane in the house. Now it's hard to believe he's the same Iggy who's the boss of the Panheads, this motorcycle gang that strikes fear into the hearts of everybody, including the cops. Then Loretta wakes up and stretches like a cat, yawning so you can practically see right down her throat, and she says, I guess I needed that. And then she giggles, hiding her mouth. I guess I need a lot of things. My father wipes his mouth with his folded paper napkin, and he ignores her and looks at Iggy and says, you ever do time? You could be a cook. Iggy gives this nervous, like, wouldn't that be fun, being a cook in prison? He says, anytime you want, I'll show you the place I told you about. My father stands up. Now is good, he says. He looks right at me. Come on, boy. And that is it for chapter 16. So like I said, action picks up really quickly. So hopefully you're getting into Max, into his head a little bit, into the things that might be going through his head, or nothing, right? Because of the shock of his dad being paroled, released from prison for good behavior, or, you know, he made big improvements, but whether that turns out to be true or not, the very first thing he does is break a restraining order where he's supposed to stay away. And the first thing he does is come and kidnap his son. So you'll have to pay attention to the last couple of chapters to see who's right, who's wrong, what's the truth in that situation. But don't forget to work through the packet a little bit. Look up some of the words, and if you wanted to lighten the mood, you could look through the back of your book. It has Kevin's dictionary intact. But if you wanted to kind of flip through some of it, you could. Zoo is my favorite, by the way. Zoo, Z-O-O. So if you look up that one, that one's my favorite. So happy reading.